Hey, did you ever really feel like you wanted to waste 15 minutes of your time listening to some nut job on the internet blab about stuff that happened 200 years ago? Well, guess what? The stick figure historians got you covered. Stephen Austin stood dutifully on the bank of the Colorado River as he safely saw the last family of settlers disembarking from the boat. The last of the 300 families and the beginning of his new enterprise. He had a pretty sizable chunk of land staked out near the mouth of this river, and it would be carefully divided into plots for each household. Stephen could already practically see the little rows of houses sitting snugly on each plot, the fields around them speckled white with ripe cotton, or long rows of gangly sugar cane, and his cut of the profits flowing into his treasury. He could see them almost as clearly as he could see the Indians in the distance. It was the braves of the Karankawa tribe that stood afar. They too were watching the settlers at the mouth of the Colorado. And it was no happy daydreams that they envisioned as they watched the white men scrambling ashore. Where Stephen saw prosperity and bliss, they saw famine and death. For this place was their winter hunting grounds. Every year they came here to catch the fish and shellfish that sustained them through the cold and lean months. If the settlers stayed here, there was a good possibility that the families of these Karankawa braves were going to starve. When the Indians saw that not many men were left behind to guard the supplies on the boats, they saw a perfect chance to make their strike. With angry war whoops they descended on the men there, killing several and making off with some of the supplies. And so began again the typical feud of the white and the red man. There followed a battle of skirmishes, ambushes, and small-scale massacres over the following weeks between the two peoples. And it was getting on Stephen's nerves. His settlers weren't going to want to stay here, let alone plant anything, if they had to constantly worry about getting an arrow in their backs all the time. The solution was pretty plain and simple in his mind. The Karankawa were the problem, so the Karankawa needed to go. Stephen started spreading horrible, frightening stories about things that the Karankawa did. These stories were so awful, I don't even want to tell you what they were. And they were not even true stories. But the settlers believed Stephen's stories, and because they were afraid, they began to think that his idea of killing all the Indians was the best thing to do. You may see now why I have chosen to call him Stephen the Cruel in our story. And so, Stephen organized groups of rangers to ride around the borders and protect the settlement from Indian attacks. In the years to come, these groups would go on to be called the Texas Rangers, a band of some of the roughest, toughest fighting men of the Southwest. Their adventures are the stuff of storybooks and lore, but few is the one that can claim real honor. Although, I will say, the Lone Ranger was pretty awesome. He didn't stay a Texas Ranger, though. Plus, I mean, he's got an Indian sidekick, so double awesome, right? Anyway. The Rangers helped much with the problem of the Indian attacks, though it was never really eliminated. But life went on in the new settlement at the mouth of the Colorado River, and lucrative cotton and sugar were indeed planted. You would think that Stephen was pleased, but that wasn't quite the case. You see, he hadn't counted on his settlers not wanting to pay him. They were very reluctant to give him the fees he asked for as impresario. Who did he think he was, anyway? It was they, the settlers, who had worked so hard for the money, not him. Stefan was ending up spending way more money on the new settlement than he was making. Perhaps he was beginning to wonder if he had inherited his father's cursed fate in business. But Stefan toiled on. As a devoted member of the Freemasonic Lodge in Louisiana, he felt a duty to carry on the society in this new American settlement. He sent a petition to the Grand Lodge in Mexico City, and soon got their permission to start his own lodge. And, naturally, as the founder of this new lodge, he was named the Worshipful Master of it. Worshipful Master. The big shot. Actually, if you think that name is over the top, check out some of these other rankings. I mean, Worshipful Master just pales in comparison with something like the Sublime Prince of the Royal Secret. Anyhow, Stefan didn't get to keep his prestigious title for very long. As the tensions grew between the Texans and the Mexican government, yeah, there is going to be tensions, I just gave that away. The latter began to look for any possible root of the issue. And when they investigated the history of the Freemasons in America, they didn't like what they saw. Always the American branch of the society had been advocates of revolution, and had worked to instill their ideas into the common people. And revolution was the last thing the new Mexican government wanted to encourage at the moment. Freemasonry was going to have to go. In 1828, the society was outlawed in the dominions of the Republic of Mexico. There was angry protest among the Texans at first, but Stefan quickly cooled the sentiment and stepped peaceably down from his post as Worshipful Master. Staying on good terms with the Mexican government was more important right now than protecting his personal interests. If he wanted to keep on making money and keep his position as impresario, that is. Stefan's loyalty was to his pocketbook, and right now, that meant keeping the Mexicans happy. He had already shown that 2 years ago, in helping to quell the Fredonian rebellion. That had been a little uprising begun by a couple of wealthy plantation owners. Hayden Edwards and his bro, Benjamin, who I don't have a picture of, which, I mean, is just as well if he looks anything like Hayden. I mean, look at that grouch. Anyhow, the Edwards bros here had become impresarios of a chunk of land right next to Stefan's, which you can see marked in red on this map here. To put things shortly, I've just got to get rid of that picture. It's annoying me. Hayden began taking land away from the poorer settlers and giving it to the richer ones who could afford to plant bigger fields of cotton and sugar. Kind of like backwards of Robin Hood. You know, instead of taking from the rich and giving to the poor, we take from the poor and give to the rich. Yeah, nice guy. I like the other way better. Do they have like a Texan Robin Hood? Okay, I'm getting distracted again. Anyway, when the Mexican officials tried to stop Hayden's robbery, he became very angry. He and a handful of settlers who supported him openly declared that their part of Texas was independent of Mexico. They called their country Fredonia, whence the rebellion takes its name. When Stephen heard of the trouble, he raised a militia of 275 Texans and sent them to help the 100 Mexican troops to go put an end to the Edwards brothers' nonsense. The ordeal ended very quickly and with no bloodshed. The rebel brothers hightailed it back to America, and peace and order were restored in Texas. Yet, the Mexicans were uneasy. They had been worried that the Americans were going to steal Texas from them at some point, and the Fredonian Rebellion was pretty alarming proof of this. Eventually, their concern grew so greatly that they wrote up a law that restricted the amount of Americans that could come into Texas. Limiting immigration across the Mexican border, eh? Never heard of anything like that. Or wait. It's only bad when the Mexicans do it, though. It's okay if we trespass on them. Heh. 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 This law said a great many other things, too. It encouraged Mexicans to come and settle in Texas instead, even promising to give them money to travel there and start homesteads. The law also said that Mexican criminals would be sent to Texas to work on building forts and roads. And lastly, it said that no more slaves could be brought into the territory. This law, called simply the Law of April 6, 1830, was to cause much trouble in Texas. Stephen couldn't avoid conflict forever. The day was fast approaching when his pocketbook would need a different sponsor. Well, I didn't meet the guarantee. I didn't blab for a full 15 minutes. But I guess that'll just have to do for today. See y'all in the next episode.